In the beginning of 1916, the 53-year-old Edvard Munch acquired the well-kept smallholding Ekely by Skøyen in the borough of Vestre Aker in the outskirts of Christiania, Oslo's name at the time. Munch soon took up residence here, having lived for nearly 3 years on the peninsula of Jeløya outside the city of Moss. At the time, the estate was made up of around 10 acres of land, outlined by hedges and fences, and entered through a gateway. The following year, he purchased 2 additional allotments. In a literary note, Munch described the property thus: Ekely is an orchard surrounded by fences. It contains some 4.5 acres of unfarmable land and comprising a park, 130 fruit trees, most of which are high-yielding, 400 fruit plants, patches of asparagus, strawberries and raspberries, and a large one for rhubarb, are all contained in and around 4 acres of soil. There's nearly 1.5 acres of meadow and a piece of morass to the north, about half an acre, which is in need of drainage, but which nevertheless has fruit trees and plants, and which may be used as pasturage for a cow that comes with the property. Originally, the property contained a large wooden villa in the Swiss style, a greenhouse at the foot of the orchard, and a red barn that also passed as the servant's cottage, located further down the park west of the villa. In addition to the stables and cowshed, the barn comprised 2 separate and minute quarters for the people employed on the farm. The villa, constructed in 1897, contained 5 rooms, a bathroom and kitchen on the ground floor, and 7 rooms and a bathroom in the second story. Munch utilized both the basement and the attic as storage for lithographic stones, printing plates, and works on paper. Upstairs, he kept a small printing workshop with a hand-crank printing press. The sitting rooms were modestly furnished and without curtains. Munch utilized the bright and glass-covered veranda as his studio. Friends and visitors relate that the house was littered with paintings, prints, notes, letters, newspapers, and books. From the glass-covered veranda, connected to the gardens with a flight of stairs, Munch would have seen a gazebo surrounded by linden trees to his right, and beyond it, a large orchard and a park. Facing south, he would look towards Skøyen, with the Bay of Bestum on the horizon. To the west, the ridges of the surrounding properties rose against the backdrop of more distant hills. Looking southwest, he could gaze out over the surrounding farmland and villa properties and the distant hills encircling Oslo. Immediately to the east of the villa lay a small grove of elms with gnarled trunks 100 years old. Proper farming and maintenance of the property came to a halt shortly after Munch acquired it. However, fruits and berries from the estate were still sold in the city during the artist's first year of residency, and the produce was most likely traded in the popular markets Vestkantorget and Youngstorget. The park and orchard soon turned into dense wild growth. The draftsman Krigsdal, who lived next door to Ekely and was 11 years old at the time of Munch's arrival, years later recalled the soon overgrown gardens. Ekely was now in the possession of its new owner, and with that, the smiling bourgeois pastoral leisure of the days of the district gardener were irrevocably over. The years were to bring brilliant summer evenings again, but the gardens had become enchanted ground where everything was different than elsewhere. Apart from the scores of apples and pears and the regular produce of such plants, the fruit trees now bore blazing canvases like gargantuan exotic flowers. The hedges grew untrimmed and rose several yards into the air. In this corralled land, it seemed as if everything was allowed to grow of its own accord. The estate soon saw the construction of a number of artists' studios. The first brick studio, designed in 1918 by Arnstein Arneberg, the architect of Oslo City Hall, was erected over the years 1919 to 1920. Munch had provided the architect with a series of sketches and instructions. Still, he was not pleased with Arneberg's proposed design, and complications arose around the construction of the building. 10 years later, in 1928 or 29, parts of the brick studio was incorporated into a new and larger structure that also contained an open-air section to the south. The studio was conceived by the renowned architect Henrik Bull, a childhood friend of Munch, who in the past had designed such monumental edifices as the National Theatre, the Museum of Cultural History, and the Treasury. The new studio became known as the Winter Studio, most likely because electric heating and lighting was installed so that Munch could work during the dark evenings and nights in the winter. A printing studio was set up in the basement. This studio remains almost unchanged to this day. Over the years, several simple wooden structures with outdoor studios in various shapes and sizes were erected on the property. In order to fit in with the surroundings, these buildings were required to visually harmonize with the surrounding villas. Munch soon needed more space for working on large canvases, leading to the construction of 2 connected and elaborate wooden studios near the servants' cottage 3 or 4 years after he had acquired the property. Munch dubbed them the Southern and Northern Studios. This compound was made up of 2 wooden structures of approximately 100 square meters each, and with sufficient ceiling height to mount paintings in successive bands along the walls. A boarded wall divided a large outdoor space into 2 outdoor studios, one with a sloping roof that provided the canvases with some protection from rain, snow, and the sun. To the west, the complex was partially made up of a roofed wall where there was room for storing the monumental drafts for the university decorations, which were kept rolled up. The southern building featured a small terrace facing the servants' cottage. Several of Munch's monumental projects were on permanent display in these conspicuously designed structures. Munch would also hang the varying versions of the Frieze of Life here for inspiration and continuous review. The studios also served as storage for artworks. Munch soon set about a profound artistic exploration of his environment and its particularities. He painted the lush trees and bushes of the orchard during harvest, impromptu sceneries of the park and flower garden, and the changing of the seasons, with the furrowing of the earth and the cropping of the fields, as well as the bounty of the earth in colourful still lifes. He painted the crooked trunks of the elms in the nearby forest and the leaves changing with the seasons. And he depicted the view of the snow-covered moonlit fields. In a wide range of self-portraits, he scrutinized his own face and the passage of time, as when he was likely ridden by the Spanish flu in 1918, and, conversely, as the energetic and vivacious painter blending with his sun-drenched surroundings. In the wooden and outdoor studios, Munch was at work with a number of drafts for monumental paintings, like his designs for a portrayal of workers for City Hall. He also worked on the grand composition Towards the Light, which he continuously evolved in a collage of canvases. In 1921, he was commissioned to paint the lunchroom for the workers at the Freia chocolate factory, producing brighter and clearer versions of motifs taken from the Frieze of Life and other early friezes. Fascinated, Munch also painted the animals on the farm. He painted the horse and his own dogs, and not least the mean hound of his neighbour, Gunnerud, a dog he also portrayed in a series of light-hearted texts and drawings. In the beginning of the 1930s, Munch was affected by an eye disease, and he registered the progression of his illness and the ghostly images appearing on his retina with almost scientific precision in a series of watercolors, drawings, and literary notes. During this period, he also snapped a range of striking photographic self-portraits. Always interested in the latest technology, he experimented, driven by curiosity with a small motion picture camera. Edvard Munch frequently emphasized the need for distancing himself from the outside world in order to be able to concentrate on his artistic projects, but he nevertheless kept friends and assistants who regularly came visiting, a number of whom he betrayed. Anders Wilse, the famous photographer, called on Munch to take his portrait, and Olav Wäring routinely returned to photograph Munch's paintings. Munch also made the occasional trip to Oslo, to paint the fire in Grønland in 1919, to see exhibitions, have a beer at the central station, or to dine with German guests at the newly established and fashionable restaurant Skansen, which opened in 1927. During his years at Ekely, Munch employed several female and the occasional male model, some of whom were professional sitters. The latter included Birgit Prestø and Hanna Breske, nicknamed the Girl from the North. In 1916, Munch went to see the travelling circus Hagenbeck and encountered the performer Sultan Abdul Karim, whom he employed as a model for several paintings, as well as enlisting his services as a handyman at Ekely. Some of Munch's housekeepers also doubled as models. However, none of these remained at Ekely for very long. This led to Munch frequently having to cook and do housework by himself, something his biographer Rolf Stenersen has vividly described. He frequently tried to get by without help in the house. In such times, he would cook for himself. He sometimes also scrubbed the floors. He would always cook very simple meals. His dinner was usually some soup and bread. He would drink water and eat some vegetables and a piece of fish. He would cut the tail off the fish and put the tail in the pot. If he couldn't find a lid for a casserole, he sometimes used one of his prints. Munch's last housekeeper, Liv Berg, however, remained at Ekely for 7 years and conjured up the most advanced, mostly vegetarian menus, with local produce from the park and the allotments at Ekely. Asparagus with risotto, fried halibut with stewed sorrel, nettle soup with poached eggs, bean pies with stewed potatoes, and for dessert, rhubarb cake with vanilla sauce, gooseberry porridge, and tilslørte bondepiker, or veiled peasant girls, a layered dish of apples, whipped cream, and breadcrumbs. During the 1920s and 30s, Munch frequently exhibited his works, averaging 8 shows per year. In 1922, he mounted a large solo exhibition at Kunsthaus Zürich, which won great publicity and widespread attention. In 1927, the till then most comprehensive retrospective of Munch's works was shown to great acclaim, first at the National Gallery in Berlin and later at the National Gallery in Oslo. On the occasion of Munch's 70th birthday in 1933, Jens Thies, Munch's old friend and the director of the National Gallery, published the thus far most extensive study of Munch's life and art. For the centennial anniversary of the National Gallery, Thies erected an all-new Munch room in the museum. That same year, 82 of Munch's works in German museums were confiscated by the Nazis, who condemned them as entartet or degenerate art. When the German troops set foot in Norway in 1940, Munch was living a secluded life at Ekely, taking on a reserved attitude towards the invaders who, surprisingly, on their part, were quite positively inclined towards Munch and hailed him as Norway's greatest painter. Taking on a new, young model in 1942 and 43 brought a youthful air to Ekely and kindled new artistic joy in the aging artist. But Munch was also preoccupied by being forced to cultivate the land in parts of his property and worried that the Germans might confiscate Ekely. During the war years, he also feared for the safety of his artworks. Following an explosion at the docks at Filipstad on December 19, 1943, he wandered around the property in a state of nervous agitation and caught a cold from which he never recovered. He died peacefully in his house at Ekely on January 23, 1944. In his will, dated April 18, 1940, he left all the works of art in his possession to the city of Oslo. The city of Oslo acquired Ekely in 1946. The property was tidied up and the wooden and outdoor studios were soon torn down. The winter studio was utilized as a conservation studio and as a storage space for the artworks. Plans to establish a commune for painters, sculptors and printmakers were soon elaborated, and in the 1950s the housing cooperative Obos supervised the construction of 44 artist residences and studios. In 1960, Edvard Munch's villa was demolished by the city of Oslo, and the gardens were turned into a parking lot.